I guess I'll call the meeting to order. My name's Rodney Scheel. I'm the City Planning Director. Our chair, our mayor, actually is at a setting of my function this evening, so he's unable to join us. We've got a new makeup of our planning commissioners, so one of the first orders of business we have to undertake tonight is to elect a vice chair. So we take nominations to do so. Go ahead.
I would nominate Matt Bartlett.
Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? I think I have to say it 3 times. Are there any other nominations? I'm seeing none. Is there a motion to cast a unanimous ballot for Mr. Bartlett?
I'll make that motion.
Okay. Is there a second to that?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Sounds like we have a new chair, vice chair.
And Ronnie, public meetings aren't on the agenda. Do they come first?
Those aren't public comments. Those are going to be part of the public hearing, so they'll come later as the items come up for that.
We do that, okay, with each item. Okay.
Yep.
So the next item is consider approval of the Planning Commission meeting minutes for April 9th.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Number 4, the council representative report. I guess just to make note, at the last council meeting, we did approve an extra territorial jurisdiction that the Planning Commission approved before that. There was also discussion, there was some discussion going on about changing the composition of the Planning Commission, possibly adding another, well, they had talked about adding another member, so we'd have all 4 alders, but then we decided that, the council decided that the mayor also represents a district as well as the entire city. So I think we went away from adding an additional council member and an additional citizen member. There is still talk about having changed the ordinance that the mayor would have to appoint 3 other alders from other districts when he appoints the planning commission alders. And that is now with the CACP. There was also some discussion on, was it Chapter 38, the historic preservation ordinance, some changes Landmarks is making, and that will also clear up some conflicts and discrepancies we have with Chapter 78, which will be part of the discussion tonight. So if you're not aware of those, we'll be reading up on those here. So, anything I missed, Rodney?
No, I think you did fine.
Okay. Rodney or Michael, the status of current developments?
Contained in your packet for the newer commissioners, we always put together a memo that outlines the activities that have been going on within the Planning Commission purview in the recent past. That report's contained in this packet as well as future packets. So if you have any questions either before the meeting or during the meeting about any of the current status of any of the development issues, please let me know. If you have any now, I'd certainly entertain any questions now as well.
Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to item 6. A request by Bruce Syme for an extraterritorial jurisdiction land division request, split off an existing home from the family farm at 1150 Star School Road, town of Rutland. And this will be a recommendation to council.
There's a resolution in your packet that outlines the request. The request graphically shown here is shown to create a parcel that allows for the farm or the home to be parceled off from the balance of the farm. It is within our authority to approve such a CSM, and being within 1.5 miles of our borders, the city has the responsibility to take action on such requests, and this would be consistent with our comprehensive plan. It doesn't preclude the requirement that they go through the town of Rutland as well, but as far as the city's concerned, the recommendation would be to approve this land division.
Motion to approve.
Motion approved from Commissioner Jensen.
Second.
Second from Commissioner Seltzer. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Passes 5-0. Item 7, a request by Tom Hersh, Hersh Group Architecture, for site plan approval to construct a new shed and dumpster enclosure at Green Spire Apartments, 1040 to 1070 Jackson Street.
Tonight, I'm going to try to give educational opportunities to commissioners that aren't familiar with the process, but since this is a commercial or a multifamily site, we have site plan approval authority for improvements onto those sites. That's the reason for this particular request being before the Planning Commission. Really, it's replacing existing infrastructure, but nonetheless, it is an alteration to the site plan, so that's why it's before you tonight. The particular request really is to install the trash enclosure and the maintenance shed on the site as shown here on the existing Green Spire campus. This is consistent with the setback requirements and the zoning requirements of the district, and therefore the resolution is written recommending approval of such.
I'd look for, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion by Seltzer.
I'll second.
Second by Caravello. Okay. Any further discussion on the matter? Yeah. Commissioner
Just
Seltzer?
would like to mention, I'm really glad they're doing that. We have had some problems with the property right behind them, which is where I live, not me personally, but I mean, yeah, me personally. But that loop in there, which is Kensington Square, we've had problems with the way that was set up and the trash blowing over. So I think it'd be a really good thing to do.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it, 5-0. Okay, item 8, discuss changes in state law regarding conditional use permits. Attorney Richard, I don't want to... Edie, okay, that's easy. Okay, and I'll hand the floor over to you, sir.
Thank you. If you'll indulge me for a couple of minutes, I'll give a little background on zoning and conditional use permits before getting into the recent changes. As I expect most, if not all of you know, zoning is the dividing up of the city into zones in order to protect property owners from inconsistent or incompatible uses. And so that, for instance, you don't get a meat rendering plant next to your house, or an outdoor music venue next to a hospital, or a high-rise building at the end of an airport runway. All of those kinds of things are prohibited by zoning. Conditional use permits were created several decades ago as a way to provide some flexibility in those zoning ordinances for uses that at least were questionable, if not they didn't appear to be consistent with the uses in a zone, but if they thought that under certain conditions they could be allowed, then they were allowed to apply for a conditional use permit. And historically, conditional use permits, the burden was on the person applying for a conditional use permit to convince the municipality that that use could be permitted and would not cause a problem for the area. The recent legislation, Act 67, kind of turns that on its head and says that the property owner is presumed to be entitled to a conditional use permit, and it's up to the city to show that there is what they call substantial evidence that would justify denying that conditional use. I suspect that, well, I think this is going to result in a lot of amendments of zoning ordinances to make those what are now conditional uses prohibited uses, and thereby result in a lot less flexibility in property uses in zoning ordinances. But in the meantime, we've got a certain number of conditional uses that are still listed in the zoning ordinance. And so when you take into it, when you listen to the evidence at the hearing, I expect the property owner will present reasons why you should grant the conditional use. Frequently, neighboring property owners show up and argue that against granting the conditional use. What Act 67 says is that you can no longer take into account the feelings of those neighboring property owners in granting a conditional use permit. There has to be substantial evidence, which means, according to the statute, facts and information, and not merely personal preference or speculation, directly pertaining to the requirements and conditions an applicant must meet to obtain a conditional use permit, and that a reasonable person would accept in support of a conclusion. So essentially, it has to be evidence that a court would accept to be a reason for not granting the conditional use permit. And so I guess that's, I think we provided you with a written summary of the changes caused by Act 67, and with that summary, I'll take any questions that you might have.
If I could, just, does this, when you say that we can't take into account the problems that neighbors may have, are you saying that we can't hear them, we can't allow them to speak, or that we have some, by these changes, we have some reason we can't appreciate their problem with these changes?
No, it's not that you can't take into account the problems they might have, but if they're simply saying, I don't like it, and I don't want you to approve it, that is not substantial evidence under the new statute. To the extent they have evidence that it will create problems, that is certainly something that you can consider.
Can I ask a question?
Generally don't from the audience.
No, we don't have a public hearing on this matter, so.
Is this talk directly related to the next subject?
It is, yes, that's conditional.
Conditional use.
And can you say, do you mind saving your question till then?
I can wait till then. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Is this going to create any kind of a burden for the city government in coming up with problem solving or additional work to consider the conditional uses?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but it certainly,
A monetary burden on the city to look over conditional uses up and beyond what it is right now.
well, the burden on establishing the permissibility of a conditional use is now on, is no longer on the property owner who's applying for the conditional use. The burden is now on the city to show that there is substantial evidence justifying denial of the conditional use permit.
Mr. Jensen?
So, if I could try and put it into a different frame, a different perspective, it's similar to what the board review would be as far as the
Value of
yeah,
property.
because the board of review is a quasi-judicial. So what they're basically saying then is that we become a quasi-judicial commission when it comes to this, because it has to be factual based. It can't be opinion.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it can be opinion if the opinion is based in fact as opposed to
Yes,
just,
based in fact,
I don't
right.
like it. Right.
It needs to have substantial factual information to back it up,
Right.
evidentiary. Okay.
I want to further explain that question. If the conditional use is going to create a environmental impact on that area, is the city going to have to do an environmental study to look at that, or is that burden going to be on the city to come up with the environmental impact?
Yes, if the environmental effect is going to be the justification for denying a conditional use permit, then there will have to be substantial evidence, as that term is defined in the statute, to justify that denial. And you know, as I said, the burden used to be on the applicant to show that there won't be an environmental impact. Now it's going to be on the city to show that there is.
And I know environmental impact studies are pricey.
Yeah.
I'm just concerned with the additional cost the city is going to pick up for that.
Commissioner Barman?
Thank you, Commissioner Bartlett. One of the questions I have, you had mentioned that this could potentially result in cities going back and changing ordinances to kind of change the amount of conditional use permitting that's part of the books, but I'm wondering if it also might change the permit or the application process, in the sense that if an application comes in and the burden is now on the city, you think you might want a little bit larger window for the city to decide whether or not there's something that they need to do some research on, versus up to this point with the burden of proof on the applicants, they would know they had their ducks in a row before they submitted their application, and then you would go and have either the commission meeting or the public hearing. It would seem to me like we might have to have a different time frame after applications.
Absolutely, that makes sense.
Okay.
You may also find yourself making more conditional uses permitted outright.
Mm-hmm.
You may look at your list of conditional uses and say, if they meet the standards, it's okay to have this be permitted as opposed to being conditional.
Makes sense.
Further questions for Attorney Eady? Thank you. We'll move on to item 9, the request by Lakestone Properties for site plan approval and conditional use permit. Approval to allow more than 12 residential units per apartment building, to allow more than one principal building on a lot at 1601 Hull Avenue. And we'll start with the public hearing. Okay. Do you know who's here for?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Do we have someone from Lakestone Property? Please just give an overview of the project. Can we start out? You can introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So you guys can see it, or if they should see it, or does it matter?
Probably for those guys.
Probably for them,
commissioners,
but
yeah.
I'll try to follow and put them up on here as you put them up as well.
Good evening. My name's Brian Spanos with Lakestone Properties. Just a little quick background on the company and who we are. We're a management and development company located out of McFarland, Wisconsin. Our focus is really on local markets, developments going on in Oregon, McFarland. We've done some in the Stoughton in the past and Mount Horeb. We self-manage all of our own properties, and our office is located in downtown McFarland. The site is lot 134, Nordic Ridge. We have it under contract with Bob Dvorak, the developer. It's located on the northeast corner of Highway A and Hull Avenue. The current zoning on the site is MR24, multi-family residential, 24 units per acre. With its current zoning, it's allowed 77 units on the site. We plan to build this development in 2 stages. Phase 1 would be a 40-unit start date of summer of 2018, depending on when the improvements are ready. This building is really modeled after a project we completed in McFarland in 2016, a 38-unit apartment building across from the high school. Both buildings will be a 3-story building. Phase 1 will have 10 studios, 12 one-bedrooms, and 18 two-bedrooms. It will have a community fitness room and 35 underground parking stalls. The buildings will be market rate luxury apartments. To give you a little background on kind of the quality, granite will be used in bathrooms and kitchens for countertops, solid core doors for all the millwork. It'll have vinyl and stone exterior. It'll be a rendering of that, and in-unit laundry, luxury vinyl plank flooring, and stainless steel appliances. Just to talk about the site plan, I think you guys have seen this in your packet. Again, which is allowed by zoning, two buildings, almost identical in size, very, very similar. We label them Building A and Building B. That's not necessarily the phase that they'll be built in. It's just for labeling purposes. Our thought at this point, should approvals go through, is we'd probably build Building B first. It's closer to any single-family residential houses that wouldn't be built at this point yet. Less disturbance to neighbors, and because this is such a new improvement to the street, that building will be done first, and we do our screening and landscaping from there. As discussed, our architect in this project is Cathy and Bruce. They have designed a project for us in Mount Horeb and in Oregon that will be complete in July here. Quality materials used on the exterior, and gives you an idea kind of the finished quality and the color rendering that we're thinking at this point. Is that enough information to start out with, or did you?
I think it's a good overview. Yeah. Any questions from the commissioners? He's up there. Commissioner Jensen?
Yes. Could you tell me what's your projected price point for these units?
Our top end 2-bedroom, 2-bath unit will be priced about in the low 1300s. 1325 is kind of what we have it marketed in our pro forma. Our 1-bedrooms will hover somewhere around the $1,000 mark, and the studios will be in high 7s, low 800s.
Okay, and then one other question is, you said you completed projects here in Stoughton. Could you tell me what project those were?
We completed a 7-unit on the corner of Lincoln and Highway B.
Okay.
Maybe 2-3 years ago.
Yep.
Commissioner Seltzer?
Thank you. The deviation, if you like, from what's allowed now and what you're planning seems to me very significant for the city. Do you have any concern, or have you ever built any other buildings that have this many units per building? Because you're doubling the number of buildings per acre, and you're also basically tripling the number of units per building. And doesn't this create a lot of interior hallways and lots more management problems similar to ones we've had in this city?
Actually, we found the opposite. The project we're just completing in Oregon is a 61-unit, and with having the property being that size, it gives us more ability for efficiency in taking care of the property. If we were to propose something allowed by zoning, let's say a townhouse style, there'd be a lot more driveways. I mean, 77 units on this site is allowed. We're not here for a rezone. So I guess what we'd be looking for is, if you were to look at a different project that met the current guidelines, there'd be a lot of driveways and be, I think it would not flow on the site nearly as well. So again, that's my thought as a developer. But again, we're not looking for a rezone. This is allowed by its current zoning standards. This project really kind of fell, as we looked at it more and more, having these buildings similar to ones we've had, we understand kind of the management behind them. So for us, it's a fit. But your question is more, you think the density's too high? Because again, the density is allowed by the zoning, is my understanding.
I guess, and I wish I knew more about it, but I'm not sure of that. I just know that driving through there today, I was just impressed by how nice all those single-family homes are and how they're spaced out and so on. And then I don't know, trying to read through this 2 or 3 times, I got the feeling that you're asking for higher density per acre. No? 2 buildings instead of 1? Is that?
The number of units per acre is allowed, 24 units per acre under the zoning, under that basis. What they're asking.
77 units.
It's a 3-acre site.
It's over 2 acres, it's about 3 acres. So the whole site would allow for that.
And where did that come from? Who's owned that?
Maybe you could wait till the public hearing to ask the
Okay,
questions,
sorry.
but nonetheless, I'll just respond to let you know, the zoning classification was put in place when this property was platted. This property was platted about 10 years ago. So there was a long-standing recognition that this was going to be a multifamily site. And what's being requested under the conditional use aspect of it is the fact that there's multiple buildings. There's more than 1 building on the site. And the size of the buildings allow for more than 10 units per building. So if they could meet all the other setback requirements and the like under this, you could still have 77 units, and the number of buildings would still need a conditional use because you'd be having more than 1 principal building, or the building would be more than 10 units large. So those are the 2 aspects of the conditional use application that are before us. The fact that they're proposing 2 buildings on the site, and each of those buildings is more than 10 units in size.
Well, go ahead. Well, I just follow up to say, buildings, this is a major change from what we have as our restrictions right now, if I'm understanding it correctly, and I'm not an expert in this, but, 10 units per building, now we're looking at how many units per building?
If both phases were built, the phase 1 would be a 40 unit, phase 2 would be a 37 unit.
Okay, so to my experience, I guess, with the larger the development, the larger the buildings, the larger number of tenants in one building, and I have been a landlord for many years in different states, they get much more complex and much more hard to manage and much more hard to control. So I'm just, if we're asking for a change, I guess my thought would be, why was it made 10 units per building to begin with, and now we're going to the number of units we are? It's a major change in the way this was foreseen. It may be a good change, but it's definitely very different than what was allowed under unless I'm wrong.
Yeah, I guess I'm on a different page. I had some initial meetings and with the city prior to putting this property under contract, with kind of this concept plan in mind, and this topic came up, and again, it's zoned for this. I think they made it clear that zoning it or asking for a rezone would be very, very difficult, and we kept it within the guidelines. So the way we were guided through this process, we didn't feel like this was a big deviation from the initial plan.
Maybe I can just capture some of this. So in 2009, the city restructured their zoning code. The zoning code at that time allowed for 24 units per acre. It didn't have the conditional use standard that said if you have more than 1 building or more than 10 units per building as a restriction. They were placed as conditional uses, as we just discussed, so that you would have the opportunity to evaluate the massing and the changes to that. For example, we have sites in the city where this kind of density is utilized. Spire, which we just discussed a dumpster related to, that's multiple buildings on the same site. All the buildings are greater than 10 units. Similar to Cascade Falls, I think even in Kensington Square, there are more buildings than, there's multiple buildings on one lot. So there's other regions in the city where that was the case. Again, since 2009, we haven't been posed with this situation where this conditional use standard is being evaluated. It might be one of those criteria that we say isn't necessary to be utilized as part of a conditional use standard. He's correct, the zoning does allow for that overall density. This just requires us to evaluate the multiple buildings on this site and the total number of units per building that are being proposed.
Well, could I just follow up, because I can't keep up with all of this, so, but you're saying then that does meet those requirements? You just said here are the only things we're deciding, and you're saying that...
You're deciding two issues. The conditional use issues you're deciding tonight are related to whether 2 buildings can be built on a site, each of which is greater than 10 units.
And is that now allowable, or you're saying we're going to make a change to...
No,
decide?
it's allowable under the conditional use standards of our code.
Then why are we even being asked to approve it?
Because it's a conditional use in the zoning code, which requires this public hearing integrated process, which he just explained has kind of altered our discretion going forward.
Commissioner Barman?
Thanks, Commissioner Bartlett. I think what it might help is, I think short of a proposal like this, where they're still within the units per acre allowed according to the zoning, what would typically have happened, if I'm correct, is that a developer would come in and ask to subdivide the parcel into smaller units rather than developing a plan for the full 3 acres where you have lots of green space. They would come in and they would subdivide it up into smaller parcels, and then we'd have to evaluate that. And then they'd come in on those smaller parcels and they'd fill them with buildings and parking lots. And you'd end up with a lot less landscaping. So you'd end up with the same units per acre, but they would end up being broken down into much smaller parcels, more parcels, and then you'd have buildings that would fit is it 10 or 12 units per building?
12, sorry, I've been
12.
using 10. It's
And
12.
so you'd end up with the same amount of mass, but it wouldn't be concentrated in 2 buildings. It would be split up into 12-unit buildings over subdivided parcels. And so, I can certainly understand how, in a lot of ways, and we'll get into, our opinions on this, or not our opinions, but our evaluation of this later, but this makes a lot of sense to me rather than going through a forced fit to the number of buildings and the number of units just to fit, or to essentially seem to achieve the same number of units per acre.
Good answer. I like it.
If there's no more, we can.
Thank you, Todd.
Sure.
That was good.
Well said.
Any more questions for Mr. Spanos before we move on to public hearing? Thank you. With that,
Those are the registrants there.
then we'll move into the public hearing. Then open that, let's see, 2. I have 5 signed up to speak on this. Limited to 3 minutes for here as well, or just?
Approximately 3 gavel.
Please keep your comments to approximately 3 minutes.
Point of order? You have to gavel it into.
Gavel to open it? Yep. I will open the public hearing. First person I have the speaker, Kevin and Deanna Hansen.
Yeah, I own a property to the east of Nordic Ridge, and we got pictures of the water recently, and we're concerned a lot about the water runoff from this property and the existing water off Nordic Ridge. I'm here to express my opposition to the development of 2 apartment buildings totaling 77 units because of probable excessive water runoff. When I first saw the plans in 2005 or 2006 for this development, the plan included a park, single-family homes, duplexes, and a multi-use building apartment on lot 134. The city of Stoughton's ordinance was and still is for principal building with no more than 12 units. There's no mention of a splash pad or multiple apartment buildings on lot 134, both of which will create more blacktop paved areas and water runoff. Before the development of North Ridge started, I rented property and was able to control significant runoff off the property by no-tilling and leaving corn stalks on top of the ground. There's also a fence line and a berm that divide the properties, which has since been removed. Last fall, it became apparent to me that my farm is nothing but an inexpensive water disposal for the developer and eventually the city of Stoughton. The assurances of Bob and Tony of just a trickle and you won't really be affected at all have been diluted through time. I've been told the detention pond is up to code and working properly. The land included in Nordic Ridge development has been contoured so that the water all runs off individual lots or into a water basin on the northeast corner of the development, which in my mind is not able to hold enough water. Even before this last bout of rain, my farm has been suffering from excess water from the upper water basin, which has been pumped at least 3 times to make it bigger or eliminate silt. It is still not large enough to control the huge amount of water flowing onto my land. I am providing pictures taken on May 3rd, 4th, and the 13th showing the heavy flow, pooling of water, and erosion. If a conditional use permit granted to Lake Stoughton to put up 2 buildings with 77 units on the corner of Highway A and Holt Avenue, even more water will be coming onto my farm. Even though there's a second detention pond that's to be put in near the apartment buildings, I don't feel it will be adequate to handle the water as demonstrated by the North Detention Pond inability to handle the current water situation. There are also plans to put a small pond on the west side of apartment buildings. When that pond fills up, the solution is to put a pipe along County Road A to run downhill, which will direct it into the farm down the hill I live on. Perhaps the solution to my water issues, even though it is more expensive, is to pump the water 1/4 mile north to the existing pipe coming from the pond at Westview Ridge down to the river. Or another option is for the city of Stoughton or the developer to pay me compensation for the loss of my crops each year. Currently, the cost is approximately $800 per acre, which would add up depending upon the number of acres affected. It is not fair to me or my family for the city and the developer to make money on this project while I have to take a financial loss. Before I close, I have questions I want answers to. After development is completed, who will own the detention ponds? How often are these detention ponds scheduled to be maintained and cleaned out? Who is or will be responsible for damages to my properties? The original detention pond plans recommend a 25-year event plan, which we now know is not nearly enough to accommodate the water flow we have. I'm requesting that this be updated to a minimum of 500-year event. The amount of water flow out of the current and future detention ponds need to be decreased to allow for the land to recover from this runoff. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Just clarification on, maybe we can put up that earlier map so you can kind of point out to us where your property is in relation to the.
That first one on the ground down there, just where it is to the
That
actual
might
site.
be, yeah, that might be a better one there, so we can see A.
Okay, this is my property here,
Okay,
and this water is going to run across my waterway here.
okay,
And the existing detention pond up here, on the upper part, is running across here.
okay,
And to the west of the apartment buildings here, there's going to be a small amount of ponding in here, and that was where they suggested that they run a pipe underneath by the road, and then it'll drain down my property down here.
okay, so you have property up on the corner, and then you have
I
property,
own this 90 acres here.
Yep.
I also own property down here.
okay,
Down here.
all right, thank you.
Okay. Next person I have signed up to speak is Sonia Vike.
I wanted to say something to Diana Hanson.
Oh, okay.
We had made an agreement with Bob for some water runoff down on our property, but that was back in 2006, prior to the changes of the zoning in which we were never told until just recently about these apartment buildings. And the city ordinance changed in 2009. We were not told that either. And I know because we're not in the city of Stoughton, we would never have found out about this either unless we would have received a notice in the mail, which apparently was required if you owned property within 300 feet. I just wanted to make a comment on safety issues. Well, one other thing, getting back to water runoff. When these two places will run off, there's nothing for it to go to. It just sits in a pond. And if you look at the pictures that we took, you can see it's sitting in a pond. The other day, I walked through taking pictures, and it was up 8 inches, and it went over my boots. I also have video if you want to see how it's running down. And the running of the water coming out of the retention pond is causing an erosion because there's not enough grass there anymore to prevent the water from coming down. Okay, now, safety issues. I'm very concerned about safety issues because County Highway A is a very busy highway. There are many, many large farm equipment such as ours. There's farm equipment coming from other neighbors that have farms that use this highway. We have a gravel pit that they use, the trucks come every day. There's probably 15 to 20 different trucks that go by, or more. I'd say at least 7 an hour that come by every day with full loads and empty loads back and forth. We have, the intersection is also on a hill, so when you're coming over that hill, you may not be able to see it, or coming up the hill. It's a very dangerous intersection. Even pulling out with farm equipment, it's dangerous. And I know they're going to have turn lanes, but it's still a dangerous situation. Then you get into the whole avenue situation where all these extra people are going to be going down Whole Avenue, and it's already a nightmare to get out of there. That's the city's fight, not mine. And we also go into where you have your fire department, your police, your EMSs. Currently, the Stoughton Fire Department has 37 volunteers. They had 38 when retired. 25 of which work in Madison, and 3 employers in the city of Stoughton do not allow their firefighters to leave, which leaves 7 volunteer firefighters during the day. And if they send someone to assistance, that only leaves 3 to 4 volunteers remaining. The fire volume has increased 20% each year since 2012. What was an average of 100 calls per year is now 400 calls per year. And the fire inspector, Mark, currently does more inspections than counterparts in other communities. Now you're adding more for him to do. I know that this has been requested to hire more full-time firefighters, and it's been denied, and even by the current chief, fire chief. I know since 2012, he too has been asking for more help, full-time. And I am not trying to, I can understand why you think it's a good thing to put all these apartments out, but I'm asking that we get a better grasp on water flow. We make a living on this. This is our livelihood. The waterways we use as part of our hay income. Our animals eat that hay. So I'm asking you to please at least hold off or until you can get a better job or better idea on what's going to be asked of this.
I have a question for you, if it's permissible. In looking at your pictures, it appears like you already have a water problem without any additional building. Is that correct?
That's correct. We've had a problem
And so your
since Westview.
concern is that this building is going to exacerbate the problem that you already have.
Exactly.
Is there something that could be done to relieve the water flow in that area?
Well, originally, we were not going to have any kind of agreement with Bob and Tony at all. And he came out with this proposal back in 2006 that it was going to be a pond and we would only get trickled off of it. And the trickle, it's
A retaining pond,
25-year.
a retaining pond for
retaining
the excess
pond
water.
up in the northeast corner.
Okay.
That retaining pond has not fulfilled its obligation. It is, we've had problems since Westview Bridge of water coming down off of the streets on Milwaukee Street, coming down because there's no berm. They have rock piles. And if you look on one of the pictures, it's showing there's erosion. This current development took our berm out, and now there's erosion, and there's an end there that's an end cap to a street that they're hoping to come into our property. They have rocks piled up there, but there's no actual anything stopping it from coming in.
Mr. Barman?
Just as clarification, the existing retention pond, the erosion control structure, is not on this property.
It should be,
From what I
it's
understand,
not on our property.
but it's not on this
It should be
property.
on the map, down on the floor.
It's on the map, from where you pointed earlier,
There's one up here, right in this area.
correct. So I just want to make sure we're not getting confused with the retention pond that's proposed.
Proposing one in here too.
They are, which currently does not exist. There is no retention pond.
It's kind of it's half built right now, probably.
Okay,
It's in the process.
okay.
And plus, they're also proposing a small little pond that runs under that'll come down
There'll be
in.
some excess water in here, and that's what they're proposing runoff pipe underneath the county, and that'll run down that farm there.
Or down to our neighbors. So I'm just asking for your
Okay.
help.
Thank you. The next person I have signed up is Sonia Vike.
I don't think I am,
Excuse me 1 minute, could you bring the mic down towards you closer?
I live southeast of this, and I've lived there 40 years. I'm very concerned with much like they're talking about, the traffic, and I guess I don't understand why such large apartment buildings have to be out of town. All of the apartment buildings you're talking about that are that size in Stoughton are near things. You know, people can go to the grocery store, they can go to a restaurant. This is right out in a rural area. I guess I just don't, and the comment the developer made that, the least impact on people with the building. What about the people who already live there? I guess we don't count. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person signed up is Matt Belen.
I'm currently a homeowner on Whole Avenue. Recently bought a home there about 9 months ago. The proposed plan to build a 77-unit apartment complex at the south end of the subdivision is a great concern for me, as it's going to undoubtedly result in a substantial increase in traffic. As the subdivision continues to develop, it will bring in more and more young families with small children. There will also be, of course, no shortage of children playing at the new splash pad, which is very close to the road. Having a minimal amount of traffic to help keep children safe needs to be a priority in this neighborhood. My fear is if this substantially larger complex is built, Whole Avenue will change from a quiet suburban street to one that's noisy and unsafe. This is supposed to be a well-planned out neighborhood, and the notion of considering a complex of this size in this location does not make any sense. And I believe going forward with it would be rather thoughtless. Certainly, the reason for proposing this adjustment is not because it would be an improvement to the Nordic Ridge subdivision over the original proposal. I can understand the city of Stoughton wanting and needing an apartment complex of this size, but again, this location to me does not make any sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person I have is Jennifer Hull.
Good evening. My name's Jennifer Hull. I live with my family at 3144 County Road A. So we are 3 properties west of the development. My concern also has to do with safety, and specifically given the fact that our driveway comes off A right at a 90-degree turn of A. We have lived there 4 years, and there have already been 2 rollover accidents right landing onto our driveway, right at that curve. So we're very concerned with the increase in traffic that a development of this density will result in. Those accidents obviously could be very serious. There's a huge oak tree right there. No one's hit it yet since we've lived there, but if they do, that's going to be a fatality accident. So to me, the likelihood of that is much greater given the proposed density of this development.
Thank you. Next person I have signed up is Luke Johnson.
Well, I didn't prepare a speech. I actually didn't even say I was going to talk at that one, but let's go nuts. What is the actual acreage of this property? I've never actually seen that.
Say again, what was the question?
What's the precise acreage of this property?
3 point something.
A little over 3.
A little over 3. Now, question for the lawyer, actually. Functional acreage on, conditional use or whatever, this is MD24, does that include the setback space, or is it only on the buildable area?
Well, it depends on what the ordinance says. In this case, it's my understanding that it's the entire site.
The entire site? Now, why is that? If it's a density, my question is on that, with MD24 on, and it's just my understanding, what is the law that says that? Because it seems like the law's
the density and the setbacks are two different things. The density says you can have this many units per acre. The setback says that all of the buildings have to be setback so far from the street or from the side or rear lot lines.
Okay.
Those are two entirely different standards.
Okay. All right. I'm going to voice the same concerns everybody else has. Safety is concerned. Right now, County Highway A is a racetrack, and we have that stretch in between those. Everybody thinks it's a racetrack. They go as fast as they can. Putting, if you have 77 units, in theory, it's going to be 300 to 400 residents in that area. With kids playing out right near the road, it's going to be a dangerous situation. Passing lanes, regardless of what's there, definitely a big concern of that. Road utilization, County Highway A is already pretty much a gravel pit. It's not in good shape. We're just going to get more traffic in there. There have been several rollovers. I've seen 2 or 3 vehicles in my property. I'm at 315 on County Road A, so directly south. So this property would have bought my property. Also with the water issues, we have standing water almost all the time now for the last probably 10 years since they started developing that, since they started stripping land. When I first moved out here 15 years ago, we didn't have any issues with water at all. I have a lot of flooding in my basement now. A lot of damage that, several $1,000s that I've had to accrue just because of the water coming down the way. That's about it. So, thanks.
Thank you. That's all we have signed up. Were there others that wanted to speak? He's approaching, well, you have a little word? Thank you. Is that Avam?
Yeah, I'm sorry, pretty sloppy writing. It's Ryan Quam.
Okay.
Quam Engineering.
Quam Engineering, thank you.
I provided the site design for Lakestone Properties on this site, and I didn't do the detailed stormwater design, but I did work with Bob Dvorak's engineer a little bit, so there's been a lot of stormwater discussion, so maybe I can give a little bit of background on the stormwater, and Rodney can potentially weigh in as well if he's more familiar with it. But generally, stormwater, we send water where it goes prior to development. So for this subdivision that was platted, sounds like a few years ago, there was multiple drainage basins, and my understanding is the substantial portion of the water from the plat goes to other ponds. But there was a small pocket of water on the south side of the plat that drains through the farmer's property, and as with any other project, we send water where it goes prior to development. So furthermore, this project is going to be required to meet Dane County requirements, state requirements. Those requirements are intended to minimize the impact on downstream property owners. So ditches hopefully perform the same, culverts obviously perform the same. Obviously, these are rules that were created by governments. To that end, they're probably not perfect in every situation, but in general, it sounds like there's an existing pond on the site. It's definitely not the full pond. So it's, I can see why there's maybe more impact recently because the topsoil has been stripped on the site. It's going to perform differently than when it was cropped. Obviously, the proposal for the plat is to put streets in. That's going to concentrate the water. The rooftops is going to channelize the water and allow less to infiltrate. Hence, we met requirements. In order to meet the requirements, we as any subdivision, designed a pond, or I guess in this case, Bob Dvorak's engineer designed a pond, and that pond addresses rate runoff control, sediment control, and other items, safe outlets. The safe outlet, it has to go downhill. The water has to go through the property. So the idea is that the rate that is going through the property after development is going to be less than the rate prior to development. So it may not be now because it sounds like the pond isn't completely built, but the pond is going to be expanded, and ultimately, if that road is to go through, the water is going to go through there. So I just wanted to provide that background from a stormwater management standpoint. I do believe that there were some flood mentions. I think this pond, and this is where I'm not entirely sure, I think that this pond was designed for the 100-year rain event. So anything lower than the 100-year rain event should be less. In fact, some rain events should be substantially less than what was there pre-development. But I don't believe the 500-year rain event would be less. I think that would probably be more, just because we don't design for the 500-year rain event. We safely pass it, but there's going to be a lot of water going through that farm field. And as far as erosion control goes, the outfall structure is intended to have an energy dissipator at the downstream side of it. That would be like riprap. I'm guessing that hasn't been installed yet. And if it has, maybe it's filled in with mud from the construction. That would all have to be cleaned out and repaired, as everything else is vegetated. So yeah, again, I provided the site design on the site, so if there's any questions on the landscape plan or the site plan or the grade erosion control plan, I can be available to answer those questions as well.
I don't think you need to. You can if you want.
Okay.
So my name is Ray West. I'm a Dunkirk resident. I live at the corner of Taylor and Docker. It's directly east of where all of this construction is going on. I've been there 13 years. This is the first time I've seen the grass in my ditch covered with dirt and silt. I'm about 3/4 of a mile from where all the construction is going on, so I've never seen that before. So I'm to, the annexation for this is all done, right? It was done in 2006, that sort of thing?
Yes.
11 apartments per acre is too much. You're building this right in the country, man. Build the high density in towards the center of Stoughton. Don't put it right out in the country where there's no such development anywhere close to this. You're just gonna, the property already out there, all the properties are going up for sale. Do you want to change the nature of why we moved out there? Why we moved to Stoughton, to be right next to Stoughton. Regarding the variances, just keep in mind that they're asking for like 4 times the amount of changes. They're looking to double the amount of buildings. They're looking to increase the amount of units. Come on, even 11 is too much.
Thank you.
It might be worth just restating the reason for this public hearing is twofold. Is to consider whether there's multiple buildings constructed on this site and whether each building is greater than 12 units. So I know that it's strayed considerably, but certainly that's what the testimony is really supposed to be related to.
Hi, my name is Todd Merrill. I live on Whole Avenue, and I apologize I didn't sign up. I got hung up in traffic. So everyone here has brought up some very good points about traffic, about safety, and I'd like to talk a little bit about what it is that our vision of Stoughton is. During the campaign, we talked about being a family-friendly place where people can bring their children and being a destination city for families. And I'd like to bring up Oregon and McFarland, which we were talking about. Let's talk about occupancy rates. Oregon has an occupancy rate of 72.4%. These are people that live and own their homes. In McFarland, it's 78.2. In Stoughton, it's only 65.9. If we correlate that with education, the Department of Public Instruction did their 2017 report cards, gave Oregon a 78.8 grade. McFarland, this is district-wide, McFarland 80.5, and Stoughton 71.3. Now, is there a direct correlation between these? I can't prove that, but I would certainly think that there might be, and I think it's worthy of debate. Also, I'd like to point out that what they have is going to be, it sounds like it's going to be nice, granite, solid core doors. This is fantastic, but is this going to attract families when 49.3% of all the units are efficiencies? They call them studio apartments, but they're efficiencies, and one bedrooms. Who are we bringing in? We're not inviting families to come here. We're inviting transient people that work in Madison, like most of us do, or many of us do, and I would assume some people from Epic, you know, and there's going to be a lot of traffic going out on A, a lot of traffic going up on Whole. So my real point is, if we're looking to grow our student base and invite families out here, our focus needs to be on single-family houses. Condominiums are another possible solution. Townhomes, give people the ability to get in and get started. Berry Street, you know, I used to live next to Greg some years ago, and that's a great place. That's a fantastic place where people can get started. There's a lot of good spots up and down North Page Street. This is what we need to be looking at. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't sign up either because this. Sorry, that's also I was like 20 minutes late, so I apologize. My name's Abby Starks. I just moved into a home in Nordic Ridge at 2108 Markins Gate Road. And I have 3 children under the age of 3 or the age of 3, and also a teenager, but my husband is from Stoughton. He's lived here his whole life. We moved back here when we decided to have small children. As the previous speaker said, we don't get the best school ratings, but we chose to live in Stoughton because that's where he's from, that's where he wants his kids to be from, and we love this city. And we chose to buy a home in Nordic Ridge because it is a quiet, family-friendly neighborhood. And I have no issue with the original plan for the apartments. I was totally aware of that when we purchased our home, because 12 units is very different than 77 units when you have 3 toddlers running around outside your house. There's no excuse for not watching your children. I'm totally on board with that. But the traffic, just the general sense of the community is very different with 12 units versus 77. So my main concerns are safety, but also to the previous speaker's point, the breakout of these apartments, it's not attracting families. You can't put a family hardly in a 2-bedroom apartment, and I think that 1 and 2 bedroom are there even any 3 bedrooms? And I apologize for not knowing that. If there were, there was very, very few. So again, if we're trying to draw the families into town, we have either declining or maybe stagnant enrollment in our schools. This is not the way to do it. There is definitely a need for apartments in town. So again, the original plan of the smaller buildings I think is wonderful and much needed, but this is a very different plan. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay. With that, I'll close the public hearing. Hearing is closed. We're looking for a motion so we can discuss. Commissioner Seltzer?
Thank you. I'm not used to being on a committee either. I mean, I've been on the council, but I haven't been on the committee meeting, so I'm not really sure where we're supposed to go with what we're hearing, and so I'm just kind of asking, we recommend this, I assume, to the council, yes or no, is the normal way to do it? Is there any way that we could, as a committee, table this to get more information and meet again before we send it to there? Or are we required to make a decision tonight?
We do have the option to table if you choose to move that way. Again, as Director Shields has said, we're not deciding what's being built there. We're just deciding the number of buildings that could be and whether they can go over the 12 units in the buildings. So there's not much, it's already zoned for use, so we couldn't change the use of that property. But you do have the option to table that if you'd like, and otherwise it's just a yes or no. If it is no, according to the new laws, we do need substantial evidence if you decline a conditional use permit. So if you do vote no against it, you need to state your reasons and have substantial evidence, whatever that may be. So.
Well, I would just respond by saying to that we aren't just deciding the two issues, we're deciding the whole use of the property. We are deciding those two issues, correct, but they make a whole big difference in the way that property is used. And I don't think this is ready to go to the council. So if I'm able to, I would make a motion to review this and bring it up at our next committee meeting. And I have no bad feeling if anybody else would like to say, no, let's go ahead and recommend. I don't feel prepared to recommend this yet. I think there are a lot of complex issues here. Thank you. So that's my motion, is to...
Motion to table?
To our next meeting, yes.
Next meeting? Is that, do we have to vote on that first?
You have to have a second. I
Need a
guess.
second, it's not debatable.
Are there any seconds? Hearing none, that motion dies.
I'll second it.
Second by Caravello. So debate on the motion to table? It's not debatable, so that automatically tables it, right? So.
No, you have to have a vote on it.
Yeah, okay. Vote to table. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, say no.
Nay.
Nay.
I have 2 for and 4 against. That motion does not pass.
But there's only 5 of us, right?
Well, myself as well. But,
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So, Commissioner Barman, did you have?
Well, I just want to clarify the role that we're playing tonight, and that is to vote. We're voting on a conditional use permit to have more buildings per site, 2 instead of 1, as well as more units per building, the amount that's proposed rather than just 12. But if I'm understanding things correctly, as relates to this zoning and the ordinance and this particular zoning classification, as a commission and as a community, we have no control over the types of units that go into a building like this. So we can't, through the current ordinance and the zoning, we can't say, well, this should have been 3-bedroom units versus all efficiencies.
I believe that to be true.
Okay.
I was also just going to clarify one thing. There's a third part of what you're acting on. So the 2 that you've spoken of are related to the conditional use application.
Correct.
Separately, you're taking action on the site plan, the layout and the facilities on the site.
Okay.
That's separate.
Okay. And that's a second vote?
Yes.
Okay. Because I think there's a lot of, I think, valid concerns, but the concerns that really related more to when this zoning class was specified back during the zoning process. And the fact is that this is zoned what it is. And even though it's in 2 buildings, if it was laid out in a completely different way, you would have the same amount of traffic. And so those kinds of concerns really, as a commission, I don't think we can even evaluate that because it's allowed based on zoning, and that's not what's being voted on here tonight. So I guess if it requires, now just one last clarification then on the 2-part. I did not see in the stuff that was submitted the actual vegetation plan. I mean, in terms of the varieties, did I miss that, or did I?
It was a lot of
material, but I didn't see the
landscaping plan?
I saw placement of trees, but I didn't really see varieties, but maybe it was just too small for me to. Oh, no, there it is, plant list. Okay, good. So I guess I'll move on the first. I move that we approve the conditional use permit to allow more than 12 residential units per apartment building and to allow more than 1 principal building on a lot at 1601 Whole Avenue.
A second.
Second by Jensen. Further discussion? And I guess for myself, I'll just echo Commissioner Barman's comments on that, we understand your water issues and the traffic issues, but it's zoned already for that density. There's nothing we can do for that, really, at this point, so. But
I don't care what it's zoned
you get
for,
the,
it's what's proposed and what's gonna change,
Yep.
what's gonna change.
get that, so. Okay. Commissioner Barman?
I'll just add a little further clarification on why I made the motion, and that is because the fact is, it is allowable. Not only is this allowable in terms of the density, but I think this plan it provides for the level of density per acre, which is allowed by law under the current zoning. The issue is just number of buildings and number of units per building in terms of design. But this design actually, I think, will address the stormwater issues better than a lot of other designs that I have seen as a commission member in the past, where we try to subdivide and parcel out and have smaller buildings and a lot more pavement. Now, there's certainly things that I would recommend, I think, to consider to even improve it more, but there's a requirement by law that they have a stormwater plan, and that the fact is that the site is disturbed right now, and so what you're seeing out in the landscape in terms of current stormwater runoff is in a disturbed state. This is going to improve that. The other issue is that it's not the responsibility of this particular parcel to solve all the water issues in this whole subdivision. I mean, it can't happen. We're dealing with this particular site. The amount of traffic here is not any higher than what's currently allowed under the zoning ordinance. And in this particular layout and configuration, it actually allows for more infiltration, more green space, and more water retention than a lot of other designs would.
That's just opinion, though, that's not fact.
No, it's not. I'm a landscape architect.
That's why you're doing what you do. That's why you're on the council, so you can make money off this.
No, I don't make any money off this. I'm a landscape
Okay,
architect.
please,
He's out of order. Calvin.
Yeah, the public hearing is over, so we will move on. We have a motion to approve and a second.
Second.
Well, yeah, Commissioner Jensen has already seconded, so we will go ahead and vote on this. And this first one is for approving a conditional use permit request by Lakestone Properties for more than 12 residential units per apartment building for more than one principal building on a lot at 1601 Whole Avenue in Stoughton, Wisconsin.
This would be a recommendation to council.
Yeah. Would go for council in 2 weeks? 1 week?
Next council meeting.
With that, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say no.
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 That recommendation to council moves forward 4-2. So we'll move on to the second item, which is approving the site plan for 2 apartment buildings with a total of 77 residential units at 61 Whole Avenue, Stoughton, Wisconsin.
Can I ask a question of the architects and engineers?
Absolutely.
Okay. I don't know.
The architect's not here, but I can.
Can I just ask about the paving, the parking lot area? Yeah, is this, what kind of paving is, I mean, was it ever considered to have semi-permeable pavement for the parking areas? I mean, I know it's not required, but I don't know if that was considered, if this is just traditional blacktop or concrete that's going to be used for the parking lot?
No, this is just a traditional parking lot.
Traditional parking lot.
The pond is going to be a wet pond.
Okay.
But I don't think the soils are really conducive to a really good infiltration.
Okay.
Anyway, so.
What kind of soils are we having? Is it heavy clay?
It's a clay loam.
Okay.
Type soils.
So even if you had a semi-permeable parking lot, it would probably get trapped and then sit on the parking lot and still run off.
Right.
Okay.
But it ultimately does go into the wet detention pond, and that I don't believe has been built either.
Okay.
So that should help out with the sediment control as well.
All right. Another question about landscape. I'm not seeing within this site, other than the green space retention and the vegetation planting, any kind of recreational. I mean, other than passive recreation, sitting in the green, that kind of stuff. There's no playground. There's no outside seating areas. Those kinds of things.
Yes and no. I mean, there is a green space area over here that during the 100-year rain event would hold water,
Okay.
but during like the 10-year rain event would be high and dry.
Okay.
And so I envision that as an area that could be an active frisbee or kids running around type area.
So a lawn versus playground equipment,
Right.
benches, seating, that kind of stuff.
It would just be a lawn area.
Okay.
Again, it's this whole area here.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty long.
As developers too, one of the reasons we were drawn to the site is the large park that's being finished as we speak, and having the proximity to that. So, you know, was one of the things that attracted us to the site.
Mr. Jensen?
Quick question for Rodney. Isn't there a covenants here regarding outbuildings and things like playground equipment and such for any of the property for the owners?
I'm not recognizing the question as to whether there's restrictive covenants that prohibit it. We don't govern any covenants that would prohibit or regulate that.
I know that, but I mean, isn't there something there? I mean, because I know that they're all, any outbuildings are restricted.
There could be in the subdivision itself. I'm not aware of those.
Would that affect them as well?
I didn't hear that they're putting any outbuildings on the site.
Or playground equipment type.
Playground equipment wouldn't qualify.
Would not qualify?
It wouldn't be classified as an outbuilding, correct? Is that what you're kind of getting at?
That's what I'm trying to get at.
Okay.
Is it
Local
part of it?
regulations, city regulations wouldn't prohibit that.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll move to approve the site plan.
Approved by Barman.
I'll second.
Jensen will second. Any further discussion? There are none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no.
No.
No. Again, site plan is approved 4-2. We'll move on to item 10.
Yep.
I'm very disappointed in this outcome because I want to know those 5 questions we asked. I want answers to them. Who's going to pay for our damages, et cetera, et cetera. If you want the information, I'll send it to you.
Item 10 is request by Cathy Camp, Wisconsin Partnership for Housing Development for certified survey map approval to split the property at 309 Pine Street.
This property is being requested to be split. The existing home is part of a larger parcel as shown on the map here, and they're proposing to split off the single-family residence to allow for sale of that particular property. The paperwork is included in your packet as a summary as to what their ultimate goal is, but this would meet the setback and the standards for division of this parcel.
That'd be looking for a motion.
Yeah, I'll move that we accept the request to certify, or we approve the split of property at 309 Pine Street.
Second.
Carvello, second. Any discussion? Okay. With that, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. One passes, 6-0. Item 12, discuss proposed ordinance amendments. Wait, I missed one, yep, I missed 11, sorry. Request by City of Stoughton to rezone a parcel along the Yahara River and behind Stoughton Hospital, 900 Ridge Street from plan zone PD to I, plan development to institutional. This is a public hearing, should we go ahead and
Just one
open it?
second. I'll just give you an overview. This particular parcel of land, this little triangle, I'll call it a remnant parcel, but it's a parcel the city actually acquired as part of a transaction to facilitate the construction of our Yahara River Trail. The reason for the rezoning is our city-owned properties are institutional in nature, and so that's the reason for the proposed change to institutional. I'm gonna open the door.
Yeah, thank you. Do we still go through with the plan public hearing with no one registered? you know,
And
so.
you can call it open and
Call it
close
open.
again.
And I call and open the public hearing for this, agenda item 11, request by City of Stoughton to rezone the parcel along the Ohio River behind the Stoughton Hospital. Public hearing is open. Having no one registered to speak and no one in attendance wishing to speak, we will then close the public hearing. Public hearing is closed. With that, any discussion? Else we have a motion and a second. So then, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
In favor, opposed, say no. Okay, one passes 6-0. Who did the motion on that? Did I skip the motion?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I think I jumped ahead on that one. I had my
We all
notes.
approved it, but nobody moved it.
Apologies.
I thought I missed something.
Maybe he's so moved.
We will,
Did you move?
I'll make a motion to approve. Yeah.
Okay.
And Jensen seconded it. I saw it.
Second, okay.
You already voted.
Hey, we can do no wrong, right?
You can vote again, just to be.
Yeah.
I had jumped ahead and written my notes on the next item, so. Item number 12, discuss proposed ordinance amendments related to the request by the Common Council, develop an ordinance for consideration by the council that would amend existing city ordinance that no building in the historic district listed on National Register of Historic Places may be demolished without review and recommendation by Landmarks Commission and a decision by the Common Council based on appropriate and lawful standards. Commissioner Jensen.
Thank you. I talked to Mayor Swadley about this, and I think it was something that we'd like to, have an overview tonight. That's good. But I think we need to have a special meeting. He wanted to be in attendance, and we wanted to have Matt in attendance so that we could go through it and try and get this all done in one meeting.
Okay.
So it was the mayor's request, and I would agree with it, that we go ahead and do the overview on it right now, but then table it and have a special meeting later in the month.
Certainly makes sense, especially with the changeover in the commission, so. like that. So,
Just as a point of order, I don't think you need to table it.
Right.
Because there isn't
No action
an
items,
action
so-
Really
item on the floor, so.
so moving to the overview.
Yeah, certainly willing to give you a short overview. The commission has worked on this a few months, discussing various iterations of this. This draft represents what staff kind of understood, the direction of the Planning Commission, and in collaboration with the city attorney, this draft was put, and I'm sorry, Matt Dragney for the others. Matt Dragney is our normal city attorney. He's an acting city attorney tonight, but he's doing a nice job. Nonetheless, just wanted to let you know, we have been collaborating with the city attorney to try to draft this, and the commissioners that were here before recognize that there's still potential changes to this, but we did try to address the language and the intent. For those that weren't party to this, the city has a downtown overlay district, design overlay district, which encompasses